Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 284, where we're going to be talking about keeping control of your community, maintaining a mental healthy community. Now, lots of times when we talk about the health of our communities, we think about this in a very general sense. However, looking at your community from the perspective of your teams, and even your fans' mental health can make all the difference in how you're able to maintain and control your community. Thankfully, in the second part of our Keeping Control of Your Community miniseries, Sarah Makdad joins us again and shares ways to cope, understand, and manage your mental health and others to help ensure your community stays healthy. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back, and I want to thank Sarah again for joining us today because, as I mentioned before in the last episode, this is part of a two-part series, Keeping Control of Your Community. Sarah, how are you doing today?
Oh, super good. And you, how's it going?
I'm doing great, too. It's just a fun getting to the end of the week here for us both, so we're in good spirits. And why wouldn't you when there's a weekend approaching, right?
Very true.
Cool. Well, we have a lot in store for you this time, folks. But before we get to it, for any of you who didn't listen to the last episode, we highly encourage that you do. But Sarah, please quickly just introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah, sure. So I'm in marketing in games. Right now I'm the community manager at Triband. It's a studio making comedy games like What the Golf and the upcoming VR game What the Bat. And prior to that, I was working in social media, community building, and corporate branding. So yeah, super happy to be back.
Nice. And we're super happy to have you because, again, the whole subject matter of keeping control of your community is an important one. And I know we've discussed in other capacities here on the show and just about anywhere. There's lots of talks about community in general and stuff. But we're going to peel off some additional layers here today on that front. But before we do that, I'm going to change things up a bit. We're not putting you through the typical cue box round. And because, well, a couple reasons. I really want to keep you on their toes. Now, for all those of you listening that don't know, typically what I do for the Q Box round, which is a series of random questions I prepare for people, they have some insight on what those questions are, so they're not completely blindsided. But today, I'm mixing it up where Sarah has no idea what questions I'm going to ask. However,
I'm a bit scared.
She is a bit scared. I'm keeping her on her toes. But on top of that, the only hint I gave her is they're relating to the questions that we asked in the last episode, which was 283. So Sarah, I think, is ready for these questions. And honestly, for some of you listening, if you didn't listen to the last episode, they're going to be a little vague, but you'll get some clarity if you go back. And if anybody is off-put by this, just reach out and I can provide context. But otherwise, show notes should do it. We'll link back to the other episode. Sarah, are you ready to answer these really random questions that do relate to your answers from last time?
Yes, okay. Let's go.
All right. Simply put, cape or no cape?
Oh my god, there's like the Incredibles playing in my mind. Right? It's just going like no cape. So okay, I'm going. Oh no, I feel like cape would be fun, but no, I go no cape.
So is it no cape because you want to be safe, or?
I feel no cape because else I would be like just playing with my cape all the time. Let's be real.
Okay. All right. So no cape. And your favorite childhood video game?
Favorite video game? Oof. Absolute favorite.
Childhood,
Oh my God.
though, from a kid.
Childhood.
Maybe you hate it now. Like, I can't stand watching Labyrinth as a movie anymore, but I loved it as a kid. I'll have to watch it again, but anyways. Just
Oh.
context there, I guess.
I think the one that I have the most memories with would be Pokemon Blue. Yeah, I think it's the one where I've
Okay.
just spent so long on it. So
Good choice. All right, and last but not least here, what are you playing now?
right now, like right now,
Yeah.
this
What
day,
what's
today.
last thing played? Your system, Steam, whatever it
Okay.
was, last thing played.
That's a bit of a cheat because I was recording footage for What the Bats. I was
Okay,
playing
that
What the
doesn't
Bats
count.
actually.
Okay, come on.
I think okay. I think I was still playing. I was an exocolonist because I want to get all the endings, and there's
Ah,
like so many of them. So I'm still just playing that
okay,
like on repeat.
that's good. Very devoted. I like that, and driven to get those endings. All right.
I need the illustration. I need to know I've like unlocked something new.
Hey, that's that feedback we all strive to provide for our players, right? All right, cool. Well, Sarah, thank you for answering those questions. And moving on, we're gonna get into our discussion real quick here today, folks. And as I mentioned, the kind of the theme for this whole mini-series is keeping control of your community. But this topic in particular is definitely a very important one, and we talk about it in some extent, but we wanted to kind of drill things down a little bit deeper, which is maintaining a mental healthy community, which is basically a little bit more focus on the mental aspect of things that happen, with managing a community in very different capacities. So, kind of like to provide some context and paraphrase things a little bit here. In general, when we hear things about having healthy communities, I would, we generally associate it with like being non-toxic community or a community where people are engaged. It might be sustainable and growing, and ultimately everybody is happy. The studio, the community manager, everybody on that end is happy. The players are happy, fans or whatever. But I know prior to this, our interview today, Sarah, we were talking a little bit how maybe some of this can be broken down a little bit into kind of like separate categories to kind of gauge a little bit more and how healthy your community is, especially with a little bit more focus and lens on the mental aspect of that within your ability to answer on that. It's more so your experience, not that you're a professional in mental health or anything along those lines, because, well, you're not.
No, very much not so.
Okay. So with that frame in mind, my kickoff here is what's a good way to kind of like break these things down, or not necessarily a good way, because we already kind of prepared a way to kind of break those things down. So I guess I was curious. We essentially what we did is we broke these things down into three groups. We have the overall community health, which is kind of like what we're all, I would say, most of us are familiar with. Just the community as a whole, and that could be a Discord community. It could be your social media. It could be all these things, right? So I think a lot of us are pretty familiar. But if you want to expand upon that in terms of defining what that group is, by all means, go ahead. And then the other two that we wanted to expand on a little bit was the team health, and I'm looking at this more so not from a public facing, meaning like the studio, a dev, or the community manager. So team health, grabbing it there, and I'm not talking about like the the work culture. That's completely different. That's internal. This is public facing. And then last but not least, fan health and like individuals, maybe groups of players within your community. So I guess give us some ideas in terms of, is there anything else that we should break down these communities into in terms of like things we could talk defining what these things are? I feel bad because I feel like I pretty much was the one who defined all these things here. But like, is there anything?
You did a great job.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else that we can maybe define these aspects, or maybe from your perspective, why is it important to look at these in different categories as opposed to just the overall community? I think like we generally do.
I think why it's interesting from my point of view is mostly because like some of these, like let's say for example your community team health and overlook, they have a direct impact on your community health. The Of course, if like some specific niche of players seems to have trouble, it's also going to have an impact. Basically, all of them are linked and can have an impact on each other.
Mm.
And what the main challenge is to be able to tell when, you know, when your, let's say your community manager is maybe going through too much things or being too involved emotionally
Mm.
on some community drama. Or, you know, it's those type of moments where you have to just go to them and be like, hey, chill. Remember, we make games. That's something that like has been told to me a lot. Like, we make games. We're not in an hospital right now. Like, it's okay if you need to take a break and go for a walk. Like, it's okay. It's something that is good. Like, to just remind yourself. We are actually, like, I think, saving some lives out there. I've already had like very like heartfelt like fan mail, fan email, just opening up saying how this specific game like saved their life and, you know, got them out of a funk. So of course, like, games are very, like, due to the experience and all the emotions you experience when you play them, they're extremely important for players.
Mm.
But yeah, it's good to keep in mind that, like, as much as they are important for our players, the people who are making them and who are taking care of your community are also very important. Uh, so yeah, I
So,
think that's a great
no,
great division.
no, and I'm glad you said that because I think with your response, it simply shows that this is community management as a whole and controlling your community. And even from the mental perspective, there's so many different layers and they interconnect and everything. And probably that's why and it can't necessarily be broken down into groups, but sometimes it could be important to perhaps approach things that way too. I don't know. I'm not a community manager. This is just one way that I'm perceiving things or approaching things, and I know everybody has like a different system or way of doing these things too. So, but I definitely like your response because I think it's more in line and true to what typically happens. Like there's so many things going on and emotions and other factors that it's you can't necessarily bucket things down and if you can or look at it in different ways, maybe it could be helpful into how you approach certain things. So for the sake of argument here, we're going to continue with that whole idea or theme around bucketing, categorizing a little bit, just based off of how we have the questions prepared for today. So moving on, I want to discuss with you about more ideas on the team health side of things. So again, everyone that's like public facing, whether it's you as a studio, as a brand, or even a community manager, what that like can look like from a mental health standpoint and keeping control of yourself, which means you're going to keep control of your community better. So a few questions here. Now, how about let's start with, people that are, let's say, just starting a community. They're new games, starting from scratch or whatever. That whole process can be really frustrating and obviously an outright struggle. So what kind of mindset do you think teams should have, or even individuals, when they're trying to tackle such a challenge of building a brand new community?
I think it's a very interesting question because I've actually talked about that with a lot of people. How, like, you know, community management is a very public facing type of work. It's a thing where, like, it's sometimes it seems a bit magical. Things go viral, some others don't. What's going on? You know. So what's like quite challenging about the job is that I've met actually a lot of community manager who just like keeps comparing themselves to the work of other community manager or the work of just like specific account without knowing anything about the structure. Sometimes like on one account you can have like more than 6 person working on it full time, and people just don't realize there's a whole
Yeah.
thing with comparing yourself without knowing what's going on the other side that can be a bit like destructive. I think people who work in social media needs to be more aware that like there are like a lot of ways to approach social media. We all have like different like views on it. We at the core we're the same, but we some of us have budget, others don't.
Yeah.
That's right there is like one of the first like, oh, that changed a lot actually. So I think, yeah, what could be nice would be, I would advise anyone to not compare yourself in term like obsessively. It's good to look at other stats, do your benchmark, go see what are the cool things that people are doing out there, what are the things that are innovative that you've never seen before, and you're like, oh, maybe there's a way I could do something similar for my community that would work with my product. But don't push it to the extent where it just like it becomes like some sort of like uh obsessive approach of, I want to tweet, I want to tweet like Xbox, or I want to tweet like that and like this, and you're just comparing yourself to a few specific accounts. I think it would be like my first like advice, like chill. Chill. A lot of like, as weird as it can sound, a lot of game, especially indie games, I feel like people tend to forget that sometimes like things just blow up. Like sometimes an influencer from a region of the world that you didn't think much about at first picks up your game, and then it becomes like a crazy thing that all the influencer from uh, all around the world is going to focus on. Even like sometimes it happens even like a few months or years after launch. Like there are things that you can't control because there are things that happen organically without a community manager like being behind it, and it's amazing when it happens. But yeah, I think like we have to keep in mind this like luck, uh, luck. Just the fact that there are sometimes luck is on your side, and it's cool, and I love that. But yeah, I would say just like when you compare yourself, it's good to compare. Actually, it's good to compare your accounts, your stats, not yourself, to things that are out there. But don't be too extreme about it. Don't be too hardcore.
Yeah, I think a good way to summarize that is just simply like, and this is, I've said this on the show before, and I've heard it on other shows too. But don't compare and despair, right? Because that's,
Yeah.
but you can compare in terms of to learn from that experience. And then I like your other point too, in terms of like, don't push too much and get too obsessive with it, because I mean, we all know, I mean, hey, the luck and the virality stuff that happens is always great, but we all know Rome wasn't built in a day. The pyramids weren't either. Like there's so many things that, I mean, sometimes it's just a process, and to be accepting of that. And growth, or trying to push yourself to get fast growth, that can be great, but that's also a means of maybe not necessarily being healthy either. To have those mindsets of those particular mindsets. So, all right. So you mentioned a little bit about virality and things. So let's say when situations happen and communities do grow, that
Yeah.
process can definitely be a little bit overwhelming and extremely stressful. So when this happens, now the shift in focus and approach is going to change. Now, what's good to kind of prepare yourself from a mental health standpoint, especially when things are moving super fast that you didn't expect?
Yeah, my first advice is that if you have like a social media team, keep an eye on them. Because it's definitely like different, like handling like a small community, and then I don't know, tomorrow like you're handling like millions of player, billions of player. Like I would like the work is very different, and it's hard to just adapt right away. It's
Mm.
something that we all have to do, but it's going to be hard for your community team to just adapt in one day. Like if it's overnight, it's something to keep in mind. Like to just like I think what was very nice when I was part of like a big social media team is that we would sit down and just like at the beginning of the day and be like, okay, so that happened and we have to be careful, or we have to change the way we interact with player. We can't answer to everyone, but we're going to do our best. If we can't answer to everyone, can we hire new people, or can we just have an agency if we think that maybe it's just something that is going to go viral, but not something that is going to be like to have a long term effect. Like
Mm.
you have to just like approach the situation with people's health in mind, with their habits in mind as well. Let's say if you have like people who are way more talented, skillful at Discord, and your Discord just explode, you have to keep in mind that like maybe they're going to have to work the whole day on new boats. They are going to need way more like community member helping them out. And it's just little things to keep in mind that might help people, especially like if you go from like something that is like quite small to something like super big. But the main thing is if you're used to dealing with everything yourself, let's say, if you're used to micromanaging all of your players, let's say if you're doing like nervous reply on Twitter every time someone at you, you are always answering. Those type of habits are will need to change. And yeah, it's just some little things to keep in mind. But the big threat, I think, when your game goes viral is to stay online way too much. I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty. Like, the number of launch where I was awake, like for like, I was awake like almost the whole night. I was like, oh, I can't go. I can't go. People are having issue, or people
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
so happy, and I want to be there, and I want to see. Uh, this is not like I do it, but this is the worst. Like I'm trying very hard. I've decided that I'm not doing it anymore. Just because like things happen all the time, and it's okay. Just go to sleep. Things are going to be there tomorrow, and you're going to be able to see everything, and it's okay. But yeah, I think like the main challenge when all of that happen, especially if it's like something very you know either it's a super positive or super negative, is that you feel like you have to stay, you want to be up, you want to answer
Mm.
people, you want people to be aware that like the devs and the team are here. But that's like that's the moment where usually you need to look at the clock and be like, okay, maybe I can sleep, maybe it's okay.
Not maybe. It is okay. It is okay. Uh, really cool things there. And if you want to call out, like, yeah, when things grow and stuff, there's definitely going to be some growing pains in terms of how do you adapt and things like that. And I love some of the simple examples you provided. You're like, okay, like we can't answer everybody's reply. We know we're supposed to, we know it's important to, but we can't. So identifying on the things that you just simply can't do at that moment in time. Can that change later? Of course it can. And then like just simply that approach. Maybe in some situations, depending on what's happening, whether a post is going viral, maybe it's your game's blowing up from its release, whatever the case may be. It could be like approaching a day to day. Like see, each day might be a different situation. How do you approach that? And then each week might be a different situation. And then there might be times when there is no situation or activity going around. But the point being is adapt, but also be mindful of what's happening now and kind of more maybe addressing things in the moment opposed to just freaking out about everything, or especially, I mean, some we know the importance here on the show and talked about it, where planning ahead can be very important, but sometimes if you're too high up, from like with that high view, bird's eye view over everything, but there's like something really important going down on ground level. Well, being that high up isn't necessarily going to help you in that moment. So I loved how you called that. And then you had really simple and great solutions. Maybe you need to hire someone. It could just be a contractor. It could be an agency. But ultimately, you assess the situation and then figure out, like, kind of, it's like triage, right? It's like, okay, this is the problem. What do we do to address it? And what can we do within our means type situation, and kind of move on from there. And then again, on top of that, for the mental health capacity aspect of things is, okay, you figure out ways to do things, but also keeping your other team members, like you said, habits, and maybe probably some of their skill sets and things like that. Are you asking someone to do something they've never done before? And while it might seem simple to you, is it going to be overwhelmingly and a lot of pressure on them to do these things? And being aware of all these types of changes are really going to be, I think, impactful to what that does for your team or individuals as a whole, especially from a mental standpoint. And like you said, from your own experiences, yeah, and when things are going good or not, you need sleep. Like we all, as humans, we all need sleep. So don't let that take over your life, even for a short period of time. It might feel like it is already, but those things are important. So a lot of cool stuff there. All right, here's one I know that bugs lots of people, everybody out there. I don't care how thick-skinned you are, okay? And I have some 3 big questions out of this one main question here. I'm going to go through them all, and then we'll just tackle them one by one fairly quickly, I guess, because we could go forever on this subject. So there's definitely times that you're going to have haters and trolls and people that are just like, making your life difficult, from whether, whether they're making comments or that are just rude or sometimes, unfortunately, just hateful. So these are my questions I have for you here. What are good ways to approach this kind of behavior? And I know there's lots of different ways. It's usually case by case, but what are some general good ways to approach this kind of behavior?
Okay, so I am a big fan of the ban button.
All right, not worth my time. Banned.
Yeah, it's mostly like, as you said, every situation is different, right? Depends on what they did, but if I'm thinking about the level of toxicity that you're thinking about, there are people out there who just want to, they would just want to come into your space and be horrible to everyone. For this type of people, usually communication is very hard. Like, you can go into their DM and try to appeal to their humanity, but usually when they already enter the space with an extremely, let's say, I don't know, extremely violent approach, usually they're going to keep being this way. My favorite. I'm definitely a big fan of the ban button. I'm a big fan of the blocking. I'm a big fan of deleting all of their messages on the Discord at once. Because mostly my position here is that I've worked on projects where this happened, and I've seen different community lead handle it very, very differently. I think also depending on the type of game you're working with, sometimes you attract this type of haters, trolls, whatever you want to call them, more than in other genre of game. You have to, so it's something that you can actually prep yourself for. If you already know that it's a type of game that just attracts trolls, I think my first advice would be like just like prepare yourself. Don't wait for launch. Don't wait for even like your Discord to be created. You have to think about that prior to all of this, just so that you can prepare yourself, that you can get like a guidelines ready, toxicity guidelines ready. I'm not talking about rules here that you put on display on your Discord. I'm talking about like real guidelines that you could give to any CM that would enter the space and be like, okay, this is a pure no, this is a pure no, this is a pure no, this maybe let's see, let's check, and just discuss with other, like, let's say if you have other people on your team those aspects, or even discuss with the dev, see what they think. You're the expert on that subject, so you're taking the decision, but it's good to always have like different point of view. But yeah, if you're, in my case, when I was talking about that game that I released that attracted a lot of, was toxicity at launch. So that was like just like Steam discussion floated with racist, transphobic, all of those very lovely thing that just makes the work horrible. like really, like for me, like and I think for everyone in the dev team, you're just releasing a game and you can't wait to see the review. You can't wait to see people playing it on Twitch, and then suddenly this happens. It puts you in a mood,
Yeah.
of course. Puts you in a mood because suddenly, you have to put on hold a lot of things, especially when there's like 100 of like Steam discussion being posted at the same time and you're having raids. Um, it means that, let's say, if you're the only community manager on that game, so you have to put things on hold to take care of these people. And in my case, what like pushed me to being a big fan of the ban button, especially for that project, is that the community we had been building like since reveal of the game, they started posting like on Reddit and on Twitter going, "Oh, guys, folks, just avoid Steam discussion, avoid Steam, don't go on there, it's horrible, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Oh my god, this is exactly the thing that you don't want to happen. You don't want like toxicity to be able to thrive and to be for people that are actually super vocal and very usually swarming your space. You don't want them to be able to disgust other people, to at least in my case, I didn't want toxicity to be associated with that game at
Mm.
all. Like, I just didn't want that game to be like, the type of game where you're like, oh yeah, of course you're going online multiplayer. Of course you're going to get insulted. Just don't put on the mic. I was like, no, 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 no. This is not going to happen on my watch.
So let me ask you this
So,
then, because,
yeah.
and I don't mean to interrupt, but because it sounds like, because I know that like sometimes hearing these things, and you gave some good examples there, but hearing these things in any capacity can be somewhat a little bit overwhelming too, from like a CM's perspective, or even a dev's or a studio's perspective. So and like you said, even with like the quick answer you gave earlier was the ban button, right? But it
Yeah.
sounds like then, and again, this is where the thick skin can come in, and it isn't always going to be as thick as you would like it to be, no matter how thick you think your skin is or not. It's a good way to just simply approach, like you said, with those things set up, and look at it very objectively, and try and do your best to tell your mind, like, okay, this might be you dictate or determine from your point of view, the company's point of view, this is good, this is bad, and try to make it as case by case, obviously, but try to make it as black as white as you can. And that way you're not worried about necessarily everything else, or you're not being overcome about with emotions. But if you look at it subjectively, like, yes, no, okay, draw the line here and done. Or in some capacity, it's going to have to be more public facing, like you said, because, oh, that person was going on Reddit. Oh, they were posting things on Steam, like all these other things. And again, you now have to have that rhetoric or that stance in terms of, this is how we're going to address this, and let other people know,
Yeah.
and kind of go from there. It sounds like. But again, I guess sounds like the way that you address these things is just prepare yourself, and there's ways to do that, but also approach it with a process, rhetoric in place, and
Mm-hmm.
very objectively. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, it can take control. It can take over you in terms of how it makes you feel and stuff.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think I have a few years. Like I've been working in community building for a few years. So like there are a lot of people who started at the same time as me who left just because they couldn't take the work anymore. It's
Mm.
definitely a type of work that can just like get you down sometimes. Like it's very sad, and I'm very like I'm. It's always a heartbreak when I meet someone and they say, "Oh, I'm leaving." I'm like, "Oh, why?" And if they're like, "I can't take the toxicity," like it's always like, "Oh, I'm happy you're leaving for your health," but I wish that wasn't the
Yeah.
way things are. And it's definitely something that I've heard. Um, but yeah, I think when you're having a project that suddenly is, if it's one person, of course, it's going to be way easier to handle and way easier to tackle than if it's like hundred of people like at a time just harassing you. But I think, yeah, my advice would be just look at it from how is it going to impact you, like first you as the community manager. Long term, how do you see yourself? Because there are community manager out there who would not agree with me. They'd be like, oh, actually I don't care because
Mm.
I can handle it. It doesn't have any impact on, let's say, the dev team because we're not on the Discord, and people are secure and there's no problem with that. And that's fair. I'd be like, okay. You have to see it from like your company point of view, like a bit like from an investor point of view, like from a business point of view. Like, is that toxicity? Is it like bringing new people in, or is it like driving people away? Like that's always like the question.
Mm.
Like I'm always like, because I looked at the stat before I did all of that. I was like, okay, so all of those hundred of like individuals suddenly swarming him, are they buying the game? Are they
Right.
buying the game, or is it like just like raids that have been organized on a obscure Discord
Yep.
that I have no idea of and I will not be able to find? And suddenly people are coming in and they find it funny, and that's what's making their day. It's something very like important to check. Like,
Because
are
yeah,
you?
you
Is
you can't be so
Yeah.
dismissive about some of this type of stuff too. But so, and that's why it's like it's almost like you have this line in the sand, so to speak, sometimes, and again, like we were saying before, there's so many different layers to these things.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I would just say, as you said, like just take things into account. It's also a good point. Like I will never be dismissive of someone who's like, okay, so as a CM, I don't think I will be able to handle this long term. I
Yep.
would not be able to see myself working for your company or your team for like in 2 years. I'm not here if this happens.
Yeah.
It's it's important. Like it's very hard to say. It's very
Yeah.
hard to say. Like it takes guts to go
It
to
does.
like your manager and be like, I'm not sure I want to handle this like for much longer because it's taking like it's taking a toll on me. Like it has an impact on me. So I understand that it can be very hard, and not everyone out there is open and aware of the subject. But I think it's very much something that counts. All community manager have different type of skill. There's some who are super talented at Discord, other who are like crazy good on TikToks. Of course, we need to be able to have a set of skills and to be able to handle all of these things. But naturally, when you look at a team, you'll see that some people have like very good abilities and skill in some aspect of the job, and they're less good at that part of the job, and it's okay. Like we're all different. That wouldn't be fun if we all could do the same thing. But I think it's also interesting to take into account, especially if you're leading a team, as I was before. I think you really have to take into account like what are the I would say not the personality, but what are the sensibilities of the people
Mm,
in your team? Like if someone at the time when someone came up to me and said, "Oh, I don't want to work on a war game anymore. I can't do it anymore." I was like, "Okay,
yeah.
well, it's cool. We're going to find someone who can because we're a team. There's someone who's like not going to be able to handle it because they just don't want to deal with the toxicity right
Right.
every day. It's just something that makes them unhappy when they wake up. They just don't want to go to. That's the beginning of the path where at the end you're like, I don't want to go to work anymore.
So finding out about
So
these things and being very from a, let's say, a company perspective, but also as, let's say, a CM perspective,
yeah,
as
yeah,
like you in the position, being introspective about these things, like really dive deep and find out like how is this going to affect um your mental health in general, because that's going to affect maybe your career. That could affect like how you do things, what
definitely.
you want to do. So many other factors that are in here, and how like how do we go about doing this? All right. One last question I want to ask here relating to this before we move on to our next section is simply this. We talked about how you answer a lot, like there's a lot of good ways to kind of keep your mental health in check and things like that.
Hmm.
But also, some of these comments that people might be coming off, they might be not necessarily more violent related, but if you look at it with a different lens or with some empathy, you might find that there could be some really good opportunities. So, have you had any situations like that where people came off sounding like, let's say, we'll call these people more grumpy than anything?
Oh
They
yeah.
sound like haters, but then you try to assess or understand what they're coming from. Maybe they're just having a bad day or whatever. So, how have you been able to take some of these situations or know of people who have and made a positive or created an opportunity around it?
Yeah, actually, that has happened several times. It would like my first memories is like one person on Discord when I was working on a vehicle like simulator type of game.
Mm.
Who that person was like super grumpy and sounded very violent. Like they used a slur, and I was like, what's going on? So knowing me, I was like, I was ready to ban. I was ready to ban.
Yeah.
But
You were on the chopping block, sir.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But before I ban, I always check the history, and I was like, oh, what the hell? This is someone who's like hundred and hundred of like pages of message on our Discord, and I would just like click on like several like pages just to check like their message in different like moment, different dates, and I was like, okay, this is actually like someone who just like that person just didn't enter and to be grumpy. Like it's different type of situation. So I actually like messaged them, and I was like, oh, okay, what's going on? And suddenly it was like it's very funny when it went from 0 to 100. Like suddenly that person like was super like, oh my god, you answered to me, wow, I'm so happy, I'm sorry I said that, I was having a bad day, and then I logged into the game and I saw that thing that I suggested like months ago wasn't still in the game, and and sometimes it's just those type of situation because of
Yeah.
course like it's people online, so you know them through username and you know them through like what they post, like especially if like they're an artist or they're a cosplayer, you kind of learn to identify the people in your community, but you don't know them as people. Like
Right.
I, I'm I'm sure I've passed like hundred of people that are on the Discord I've worked on or that follow the page I've worked on at like Comic Con, PAX, all of those events. I wouldn't be able to just point to one and be like, hey, that's the
Right.
like, hey, I know you there.
Right. And
I know you.
but
So
and it's a good thing to call out too, because again, in some ways, it doesn't necessarily conflict with what you said before about just ready for the ban button. Because again, case by case, these situations are going to vary. But it's like approaching things where just because something might seemingly, it's not always black and white, and it might seemingly come
yeah.
off as negative. approaching things with, now some things people will say and you're like, I cannot be empathetic for what you just said in this server, in this comment, whatever,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
There is no empathy there. Nope, sorry, done, right? But in some cases, you can look at those things like you did in that instance and be like, wait a minute, something seems up, because they're not like
Yeah.
outright violent, but they kind of get aggressive. And then you dug into it further and boom, look like you said, 1 to 100.
Yeah, I think one of the big rules for me was like if it's swearing, sometimes I confuse the two in English. So swearing, I think, is just like if I use the F word, right?
Yeah.
And slurs, I think, are different. They're violent and they're usually the target groups, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
am I mixing?
Very,
Okay.
very specific, if you
Yeah.
will.
One of my rule is that if you use a slur, you're out. If it's a swearing, I swear all the time. I have to say that. If you've seen me in real life, I swear all the time. I'm like at that point, I'm just like a pirate. But
Yep. I was gonna say sailor, but she kicked it up a notch with pirate.
yeah, it's cooler. So, I don't like it when it happens because, especially when there are Discord where I know that there can be younger people. I'm always like, come on,
Yeah.
you could have taken that to me directly. Like, you can DM me at any time.
Yeah.
But when it's very violent towards specific people or specific communities, but that's my personal rule.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
big no. And if it's just like you said the ban the F word once,
Right.
I'll be more like hello, please chill.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, I think
So-
every like type of toxicity, like it's
It
it's
varies.
different. And yeah, and community manager also, what's very funny about that is that different community manager are going to react differently to it,
Right.
and are going to, like, for example, something that was toxic for me wasn't necessarily for someone in my team.
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, come, it's not toxic for you." And she'd be like, "Oh, come, it's toxic for you." Like at the time, I had a full-on discussion about something that was happening in one of our multiplayer Discord, and I was not agreeing with the with the person in charge of that game. I was like, "That's toxic, man. That's toxic." And he was like, "No, that's funny." I was like, "No, that's toxic." And we had this full-on conversation. And in the end, what we did is that we just took like people from our team, but also people from other teams, like creative producers, all those type of people, and we're like, okay, who is it like funny for? Who is
Yeah.
it like?
That's a good
seen as-
approach.
like, it's a very interesting approach because what I noticed is that if you're someone who's like, because I was working for a long time at a French publisher. So if you're someone who's French, the things that are going to be toxic to you are not exactly the same things that are going to be toxic to someone who like speak English or has like a more of North America, UK type of upbringing.
Right. Yep.
Like the limits between French and English speaker very different. Like we would see like we would have like some of our British colleagues be like, "You guys are crazy, what the fuck?" Like, guys, this is toxic. And then you'd speak to the French community manager and be like, "I don't think so." Like, even between like
Yeah.
nationalities, there would be like clashes.
Yeah. I can't
so-
stop to think about how many different layers. Just that's like
yeah. It's very like. So yeah, I think what's good, especially if you have a team, is to not be afraid to be like, okay, for me this is a no-go, and also and ask what people think about it, but also stand your ground. Like for me, like I was very like adamant about the fact that I didn't want toxicity in my communities, and I'm very proud that it's the thing that I'm the proudest of in my career is that I managed to stick by it. And maybe it's not something that would have been as important, for example, for that colleague, but it was to me. So yeah, I think it's just like a balance of your need as a person, but also what you see as good work done,
Hmm.
the impact on the product in terms of sales. If the toxicity is driving away people, oh, that's the moment where I really can't handle it anymore. Like I'm like, okay, this is no,
Yep.
because like it has an impact on people mentally, but also on people like very much physically. It's going to have an impact on your studio and on your business and everything like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and that's just a moment where you make your choice depending on who you are and depending on the situation. And yeah,
yeah, and move from there for sure. Because I mean, all of that stuff's very important. Like getting, like, and this goes back to other things we've talked here on the show too. Is like getting everybody on the same page and knowing what's like. Because again, with those different viewpoints, it's also about okay, what's important to us in terms of what we represent, what's important to sales, what's important to the brand, and also what's important to our team members
yeah,
and their health and how it affects. Because if no one can decide on something, that could mean like okay, this team member is now all right. Then I'm all set. I'm not going to do this anymore, type thing. And it's always about like assessing what these overall thoughts, feelings, and impacts are going to have, and trying to do your best to get everybody on the same page. And if they can't, then I mean that happens too sometimes. So,
yeah,
all right, I know we're coming up here on time, but I definitely want to talk about this a little bit. And we're folks, we're really taking this with a grain of salt here because this is I want to talk a little bit about fan health. And now here's the thing because like fan health and as we defined it before was simply like hey how are other individuals feeling and things like that. And I know in the last episode we talked a little bit about like adapting to communities and making sure that people aren't left out and stuff, so we're not so much going to be discussing that but more so of like here for example like as a public figure, because if you're a brand, if you're a community manager, you are probably in some capacity a public figure,
yeah,
depending, right? I mean, you're managing a community.
yeah,
Now, well, as a public figure in this space and in the capacity that we're talking about here with games, while it's not our job, do you feel that we have, and I'm speaking we as in terms of community managers, public figures, whatever, have some kind of obligation to help those that may be in need? And I'm talking about players or fans or whatever. Now, with that question in mind, so do we have that obligation? And then on the flip side, should we feel this way or even offer help? And I know these are some pretty big topics we're covering here.
yes. Wow, you're going for it. Oh my god.
And we're trying to and because I know we're both short on time here, so we're going to try to sum it up. But
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so should you have an obligation, and should you feel this way, and should you offer help? And again, I'm sure it's going to be case by case, but go.
Yeah, I would say it's case by case, but I think just due to community size, you are going to see that an individual is going maybe to DM you and say that they're not feeling good, that they're maybe sometimes extreme, like not extreme, but something very like important things that they're going through, and it can be quite overwhelming. My advice would be to always remind this person that you're not an elf expert, right? You're just like someone who's working with their community, and you're working on a game, and maybe that game do have like a crazy impact on them, but you're not someone who's going to be able to just you know take a plane, go to where they are, and
Right?
really
Exactly.
change their life as much as you would like to. So my advice as a community manager, if you're seeing this type of situation, would be to always have like resources ready.
Mm.
There are resources like international resources. I'm meaning hotlines, orgs that you can find. There are lists that you can find that are divided by region and countries of the world. Always have that as a link that you can send them. Always be like mindful and nice, but don't let it overwhelm you. Because I think there's something that is very true for everyone working in games, is that we want people who play our games to feel good and to be happy about it, and to just like, it's always nice when people come to you with positive things. But when it's more like uh, you know uh, things that are linked to mental health and things that you're not an expert in, and things that can be very like even like I would say stressful if it's the first time you've been in this situation with someone and you don't know how to handle it, because it's not an easy situation at all.
Right. Yeah.
Like not everyone uh, will be able to find the right words to be able to approach it with the right way. If that's your case, like be very aware of it. Ask for like advices if you have like other team members and things like that. But my main advice would be to just have those resources ready to just remind the person that uh, you're not a health professional, and that there are resources, like even free ones, that you can reach out to out there, and to just be like very open and just be like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry this is going on, and please check this out.
Right. So it's more of so maybe to answer these questions directly, it's not your obligation, but there's no
No.
but there's no reason why you can't guide them to getting the type of help that they may need to a degree. Like,
Yeah.
you're not saying, oh, you need to see this specific type of doctor. Like,
I wouldn't
no,
I wouldn't
no.
be able to do that.
But like, I think that idea is great in terms of having some resources ready, showing that you're compassionate, but and being clear with them. Hey, look, I'm sorry you're going through this. I am not. I unfortunately can't help you, but what I can do is provide you this list that can maybe put you in the right direction, and then
Yeah.
kind of leave it from there. And I know sometimes conversations can go like beyond that or whatever, or they'll try to. And I think probably just like restating those things. It's like, hey, look, again, sorry, whatever. This is what I would suggest, so that way you can address these things in a better way that's going to be helpful and whatever other capacity that you can respond to. But yeah, no, I think that was like dead on, and something like you said. Oh, this doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen, and it can be pretty stressful and even emotional on you. Like, oh, what could I have done to help this person? But nothing. Really is what it comes down to is nothing. But we feel like we're humans, and as community managers, we're very open, and these things can happen where we feel like, oh crap, I could have done this and that and more, and we feel like that about everything. But when other people are involved, we're gonna feel a lot more like it.
I would advise anyone out there who's like working in community management or community development, any of these things, to check out like the community manager toolkits and the community manager mental health masterclass that Safe in Our World has.
Yep.
It's like a mental health org supporting like doing awareness work, but also creating like classes and courses that you can take as a community manager. Like they had like a full community. I think they still do actually.
Yes.
They have a community manager like masterclass that is totally free that you can sign up for on their website, and a lot of like social media experts are taking it because it's very, very good. Like I took it and it was very interesting for the subject. It was also super interesting because I was in like Zoom calls with like 20 other social media people from games. So it was cool to meet other people. And it was also very, very cool to do some of the exercise together and to be like, oh, actually that happened in my Discord. Oh, you too. What did you do? And to check with each other, like our habits, our practice, how we handle things. It was very, very interesting. I definitely recommend it to anyone out there.
Awesome. Well, and I'll definitely put that in the show notes too, because again, knowing that information is just going to be completely helpful, and having the right resource, and then that organization in particular is probably one of the best organizations to get that from, because it's very focused on gaming.
Yeah.
And it's not to say other resources wouldn't be as helpful. I'm sure there would be, but this is definitely a good one to consider. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Well, I unfortunately that's all the time we have today, Sarah. But again, if you could, I just can't thank you enough for having this conversation because I feel like it's not necessarily talked about enough, at least in maybe to some of the layers that we peeled off today and discussed. But with that said, again, what's a good way people can reach out to you and talk to you or whatever, or even learn more about Triband and some of the cool games that you guys have going on?
Oh yeah. Well, I think if you're very into Triband, you can look up What the Golf. That is already like our like main release title. Very funny, and you can play it with like pretty much anyone. That's what I really like about What the Golf.
Nice.
And we have What the Back coming up. If you're more of like a VR player. But if you want to just like send me an email or contact me like on social media, I'm very very active on Twitter, especially. My @ is Makdad Sarah. That's just my name. So it makes it easy for people to find me. And I just wanted to thank you because, like, as you said, it's something that is not talked about, or at least not talked about enough. I feel like it's something that, for example, I wasn't trained, for those type of things, but it's something that is very important to the job. And I hope it's something that people think way more about in the future, just for the safety of the players, but also the safety of their own employees. So thank you so much for having this discussion with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.